Hello, my name is Roger Springman, and I'm here today along with Todd from the Landmarks Commission to talk about an important part of the upcoming referendum on November 8th that concerns us. Our focus today is on the capital request aspect of the referendum and the buildings that are either being torn down or built on the sites involved in the upcoming referenda. There are two questions that are on the referendum on November 8th. Question 2 involves the River Bluff campus, and question 1 also has an element regarding the River Bluff campus and the Ahara Elementary School, and I'll be covering that later. To get us going, I'll be introducing now Todd to go over his program and his concerns about question 2. So Todd?
Yeah, my name is Todd Hubing. I'm the chair of the Stoughton Landmarks Commission. I actually grew up in Stoughton, went through the school system here. My father was a high school teacher. My mother was a teacher's aide. So I'm very familiar with the system, a very big supporter of the system. However, we're here today because of a concern, particularly with referendum question 2. As part of that question, the school district would be removing the Stoughton Community Building, rebuilding a gym about 200 feet away. And I think that many people don't realize how important or how historic the community building is. The community building was a WPA project. It is Stoughton's only WPA. The WPA is the Work Projects Administration. It was a program set up under FDR's New Deal in the 1930s to help the nation come out from the recession. It basically involved the federal government paying for all of the labor for various projects that were infrastructure projects in the United States. The Stoughton Community Building started out in 1938 as a plan to build quarters for the Stoughton National Guard troops. Stoughton was in danger of losing their National Guard troops because they didn't have adequate quarters for them. And the mayor of Stoughton thought this would be a good project for WPA funding, a good candidate for WPA funding. And so they went forward with the project, but this is at a time when the nation is not at war officially, but there is a very large war in Europe and in Japan and China. Although the U.S. was not officially in the war, U.S. ships were being sunk, American lives were being lost. I have a copy of the Stoughton Courier from January 7th, 1941, which announces the funding of the new Stoughton Community Building. But if you look at the rest of the page, you see that the war dominates the headlines. If you look at every issue of the Stoughton Courier in 1941, the war dominated the headlines. It was pretty well understood that the nation was going to be going to war. And so WPA projects that were defense-related got extra emphasis. And this National Guard quarters that was originally planned grew and grew and became basically the community building that we see there today. It was the Stoughton Armory, so it was an armory / community building. But what was ultimately done was, like most WPA projects, they not only wanted to hire laborers, they wanted to employ engineers, architects, artists, and so the community building that was designed was it was an Art Deco design, very fancy, had a lot of nice touches to it, but at the same time it was a fortress. It was an armory. It was designed to be very sturdy, and basically it still is today, very sturdy. It had a gym. It was partially funded by the school district and partially funded by the Stoughton community. So it had a gym. It was designed to be a place for meeting. It had band practice rooms. It had locker rooms. It had a rifle range. It had kitchens. It had National Guard troop quarters. but it was done in a very beautiful way, and you can see from the artist's rendition, that's basically exactly the way the building looked when it was built. It's truly a beautiful and functional building. If you compare that to the way it looks today, yes, some of the windows have been boarded up. There's air conditioning units sticking out the front end. There's a little wooden structure built around the front. It's not as beautiful today as it was, say, 50 years ago when I was a student, but it's still a very beautiful building. And it's one that could easily be restored. It's fundamentally, all of the structure is still very sturdy. It's still very good. Yes, we need some remodeling, bathrooms, and general work, electrical work, and HVAC work. That's relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of trying to remove a big, heavy, sturdy building like this one. And so we feel that perhaps the school district didn't understand, first of all, the historical importance of the community building when they made the decision to move it. But also there seemed to be a lot of misinformation floating around regarding the costs of fixing it up versus the costs of moving it. The school district never obtained costs for restoring the building and making it ADA compliant.
And Todd, we've talked about this between us. What do we think would be a better solution then for where the school board is with this important question on the referenda?
Yes, well, I think part of the strange thing about this referendum question was that it was an interim school district administration that came up with it. It seemed to have been rushed through. The Stoughton Historical Society and the Stoughton Landmarks Commission, of course, are very interested in any talk about removing something like the community building, and yet it was basically sprung on us in July. It was also, we had a facilities person who's no longer with the school district, and so my feeling is that I've met the new district administrator. I have a great deal of respect for him. I think he's somebody who will do great things for the school district. My feeling is that he and the new facilities person should have an opportunity to come up with an actual plan that makes sense and that everybody could get behind.
Right. One of the things that we've talked about, and I've talked about with some of my friends, Todd, is the fact that when you're tearing down buildings and putting up new buildings, especially so close, it's really important to have a clear vision on where you want to go. I think one of the things that we think is missing is some kind of vision for the entire campus area. That is, the River Bluff includes the middle school. It's got the 1892 high school there that we've all really gone out of our way to protect. We've got the administration building there. We've got the armory there, and we also have a maintenance building on the far east. So it's a very complex area, and I, for one, have not seen a visionary plan for the whole campus footprint. What's going to happen next?
Yeah, and that's certainly a concern. Actually, I recognize that the traffic congestion on that campus is a problem now that needs to be addressed, and certainly concerns for the safety of the students who are walking across parking lots now to get to class. I will point out, though, maybe 50 years ago when I was a student there, we had 800 students on that campus. We did not have traffic problems. I know times are different now, but a key thing was with the arrangement of the buildings, many of the students got dropped off on North Street. The 6th grade students were taken in deeper to the campus. Nobody had to walk across a parking lot. We didn't have traffic fighting each other or jockeying for position back then. And we could still do that. Other plans have been suggested that would, either for moving the campus completely to a new spot or moving the administration function to a new spot. Plans like that make a lot of sense, and one of the concerns I have is that if they invest $12 million into renovating the campus the way they proposed, they're further entrenched in staying in this place that's just not going to work out in the long run.
Digging that hole deeper.
Yeah.
Right. One of the other things we've talked about between us and with some other, again, friends, as I just mentioned, is the fact that the River Bluff campus is a very small campus. And in fact, standards for most middle schools are that you need 20 acres of land around a middle school for it to properly function, not just in the short term, but to have space for expansion and also for athletic fields. Now, one of the things that I've observed, Todd, and you're surely welcome to comment on this, is the fact that that proposed plan that they're putting forth in question 2 looks like it's actually going to reduce the amount of open space or green space at that property site because of the traffic flow for parents to pick up their kids in that center area, and at the same time, because of the weird pie-shaped profile of the River Bluff campus, there'll be zero room for any new classrooms in the future. And that really concerns me, and I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, yeah, no, I share that concern, and also parking has been a problem on that campus. It still is a problem on that campus. The new plan doesn't, it does create some new parking spaces, but it covers up old parking spaces, and there's no real significant net increase in the amount of parking on the campus. So one thing that they've identified as a problem now is not being fixed by this.
Right. So all that to say is that Todd and I and others are concerned then that we're maybe going in the wrong direction with this question 2. And that is why I'm voting against it, and I'm betting very much that Todd is too. And we'd like to have all of the citizens of Stoughton really consider the value of that building. It's provided Stoughton with unique resource community opportunities, cultural for Sit-in-Demai and for any other community events, access to gym space. It's just been a fantastic, well-documented historic site that has brought great value to Stoughton. So that's kind of where we sit.
Yeah, and I think, and one other maybe important point is that a lot of people feel like, well, I want to support the school district, and I trust the school district. And that's good. I have never voted personally against a school district referendum. However, I would like to see the new administration have an opportunity. Back in the early 60s, when they proposed building the high school in the location where it is now, they had a referendum. It failed by 4 votes. I know this because my father was talking about it. He was over watching the ballots come in at the time, and it failed by 4 votes, and then he went home, and he said my mom and 3 of her friends were sitting around the kitchen table, and none of them had voted. So, But anyway, and then he said it came up again, and it failed by a larger margin. And the 3rd time it came up, it passed, and it was really a much better plan. After 3 times through, it was a much better plan than either of the first 2 plans had been. And that's what I would hope would happen here, is that we could defeat this one and come right back with a plan that everybody can get behind.
Right, and I think that's exactly where I'm sitting on this topic, Todd, because when you look at where Stoughton is going to go growth-wise over the next decade, all the numbers that have been released by the mayor's office and planning commission show a direct input and increase in both numbers of people moving to Stoughton because of all the adjacent development and the number of students coming to Stoughton with all these families. So we are going to be needing more facilities and better facilities in the future. Let's take the time to take our breath, look at where we are, and make a long-term decision, not a short-term decision. That's kind of where I am.
I agree.
Well, what I'd like to do now, and then Todd is certainly able to jump in and interrupt me like I just interrupted him, but what I'd like to do is to go into the other aspect of the capital facilities referendum that I would like to call the audience's attention to. But first, a little bit about me. My name is Roger Springman, as I said at the outset. I'm a community activist and historic preservationist, and I bow down before no one because that's where I am. I love saving and using history wisely. I've always done it and always will. So I'm a history teacher, as you might maybe already ascertained by my comments. I taught history near Green Bay for a number of years. I was very active in getting the UW Dairy Barn listed as a National Historic Register property about 20 years ago. And more recently in Stoughton, what I did was I worked with 4 other organizations to really help preserve or further preserve the 1892 high school, and also to make sure that we could find potential reuses for that building. Because when it comes to saving a building just to save it is nice, but it's better to have reuses with it. So we worked really hard to define a lot of reuses for that 1892 high school, and have documented that with reports that we prepared a number of years ago. So with that said, that's me, that's my background, and that's why I'm here today in large measure. The other thing I'm going to call your attention to is what I would consider as a baseline for capital facility decision-making and referendums. Whenever school districts, organizations decide to either build new buildings, tear down old ones, or do major refurbishings, it's incredibly important that a great sense of long-term clarity and vision is present in that decision-making. And here's why. Capital decisions are by nature incredibly expensive. We're talking at a minimum of $10 to $20 million to both tear down a building and replace it with something else. So we're talking big money, and boy, if you're talking even high schools or complex facilities, 20 million is maybe half of what you need for a modern facility. The other thing is that capital referendums and their building facilities, these buildings last 50 to 70 years. So when you're building a building that lasts and must last that long, it's incredibly important that a care of the future and care of the present is involved in that decision making, because many generations of kids and their families are going to have to be living with that decision. So they're long-lasting decisions. Third, as Todd alluded to a moment ago, it turns out that when major projects that are capital facility based are financial, they get in situations where they're have to be defended financially and policy-wise, meaning that once you make that decision to spend that money, it's really, really hard to back out of it. And so therefore you're in a spot where if it was a bad decision or wasn't the best decision, school boards or other organizations must defend that decision, whether it's good or not. So really that speaks to the care needed to make a quality, long-term capital facility decision. And finally, one of the more important attributes of a capital facility decision is that the building that you're putting up and its plans must be adaptable and flexible as possible. That is, because that building lasts so long, it's incredibly important that that building site and the footprint that it's on have the capability to be expandable. If populations grow and you need more classrooms, or if you need to build another gym in this case, or if you need to build an athletic field, or if you have a technology class needed, that you have the space to do it. So the adaptability and flexibility of these kind of decisions is vital to do them well. So let's turn our attention now to question 1 in the referendum, which has a kind of interesting twist to it. In question 1, kind of buried within it, unless you looked really closely, is the notion of let's tear down the Yahara Elementary School and also the maintenance building on the River Bluff campus. But then, with regard to what you do next, what they're proposing is that let's put that new maintenance building at the Yahara Elementary site. Now, that doesn't ring real well to me, and here's why. The Yahara Elementary site on the kind of west side of town by the high school sits on some of those valuable land inside city limit. I've seen estimates that land can be worth anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 per acre. So those 6 acres or so are worth at least $1 million, $1.5 million, maybe even $2 million. So it's vital that that care be understood in putting any structure there, that it be a high value building and not a low value building. Well, guess what a maintenance building is? A maintenance building by definition is a pretty lower value building, which means, you know what, maybe it should be put in the industrial park or one of our several industrial park locations, or how about some extended part of one of our elementary school properties, or the high school property is pretty tight, but certainly one of our elementary school properties might have enough space back in a corner or along an edge where you could house a maintenance building. So that's something I'd like to draw the attention of the audience to, is the notion of let's put a low value maintenance building in a lower value spot. I think that makes the most sense to me. The other thing that's really bothersome here is that I have not seen any long-term vision for the entire Yahara footprint. Now that's around 6 acres as I recall, and in the referendum materials that were prepared over the last number of months, there was no vision given on what else would happen or could happen at the Yahara Elementary site once you would tear down the very old 65-year-old plus Yahara Elementary School. That site is way too valuable not to have clarity on what comes next there. So that is something that is kind of bothersome to me personally, and that's why I would hope that the administration can see the wisdom of not doing anything with that site. Tear down the building if it's got to be torn down, which doesn't, I think that maybe there is some sense in that, but certainly on the short term, not putting up anything until a more comprehensive vision for the entire site is prepared and made available to the public. And related to that, well, what else could that site be used for? Because that's important to think about that. Well, what about housing? At minimum, you could say, well, let's tear that building down and put up some houses there, single family or multiple, which would bring new people to the neighborhood and, better yet, kids to the school. So I think that at minimum, tearing down the building if needed, that's fine. But certainly leaving the site open on the short term, as Todd was suggesting, that we can reconsider decision making here to allow the best future decision based on a new look at reality and what's coming next. And finally, the other final point I'll make on that site is this. The Yahara Elementary site sits right next to our great high school, a school that gives the Stoughton community its real anchor for the future and, of course, for the past even. And so what I would say is, what about the idea of building a 2-story new middle school at that site? I'm surely not going to offer this. I'm not an engineer or architect, but when you look at the great value and possibilities of putting a new middle school, two-story middle school at that site, it's going to have immediate access to high school properties for physical ed classes. You've got the Fab Lab right across the street that the school kids could go to. You've got the possibility of advanced studies for middle school kids right there, right on the site. And finally, for parents, there'd be great value in having a single point pickup and drop off for parents of their middle school kids and their high school kids. So there's a lot of reasons why at least considering that for a possible 2-story new middle school ought to be considered in a revisit of question 1. So that's why we put on the table today for the community to consider. So Todd, I think we're about at the end here. Did you have any other final comments or thoughts?
No, I think so. If anybody is still watching at this point, I'm very grateful for that. And yeah, I hope that you'll vote no on referendum question number 2. And
yeah, and on question 1, what I'd offer there is kind of what I think Todd and I would sort of agree to. You know what? Question 1 has some great things with it. I don't know whether it should be voted yes or no. I mean, I like voting for schools like Todd does. I've never voted no on a referendum before, so this is a hard thing for me to do as well. But in this question 1 about the Yahara and the maintenance building, what I'd have you consider or think about, folks, is the notion of contacting the school board, contacting the new superintendent, and saying, hey, is this really the best use of that property? Make them really think about this question more, because it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. And quite frankly, because it doesn't bring us a lot of future without that vision for what should come next there is good reason to slow down, take a breath. Let's revisit that question as we revisit question 2 and make sure we do these things right and have a truly long-term plan that does its best job for the entire community, not just something that we knee-jerk into today, but something that can last until tomorrow.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.